It's a beautiful, sunny spring afternoon, and I'm in the palliative care ward in Kalamunda Hospital. I'm there to visit a man called David, who today is his last day on earth, and he knows it. And his family are on the way to say their final goodbyes. His brain tumour by this stage has meant not only that he can't walk, he can't eat by himself, but for the first time, he's finding it very hard to communicate. It's just the two of us, and I'm sitting by his bedside, trying to soak up the last moments I have with this man. He tries to communicate, and it comes out as just a mumble. And I wait and give him time to try again. And it's not happening. Our eyes are locked in each other's eyes, and it feels to me that he's a prisoner behind his eyes. I can see him trying to express himself, say what may be his final words, but he can't. To think after 65 years, he won't be able to say his final thoughts and his final goodbyes. I tell him in that moment that even though my ears and my brain can't understand what he's saying, my heart can connect with his heart and understands what he's feeling. And it's quiet. And I hold his hand, which I hope has feeling, but I don't know. But it's all I can do. And after a few minutes, he tries again. And as soon as I can understand and decipher a little bit of what he's saying, I quickly take out my pen and my paper, ready to write down what may be his final words, because I want to make sure that his family at least has a record of what he has to say before they get here. And these were his words. No regrets. Live in the present. Growth, relationships. Now, I had heard him say these words before. In fact, we had discussed them at length. Because after being diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumour some 6 months before, we had sat together every Wednesday afternoon practically in his living room. And in that time, we discussed life. We discussed the audacity to hope in situations like his. We discussed what it means to have an illness that you can't recover from. We discussed purpose and humility. During that time and those times, there was no shallow conversation, no good thanks, how are yous. That's with the apostrophe S, not use. Only real and raw expressions of the heart. And this short list of his realizations, these 4 things, were part of a transformation that he had gone through in these few months, very uncharacteristic, it happened to be, of the man that he was until his diagnosis. And after the eulogy which I gave at his funeral, not very long afterwards, some of his friends approached me quite shocked that this was the man that they had known all their life. In his final months, he arrived at the realization that he had lived his life on autopilot. He was in the finance game. He had built a trading platform that happened to be particularly successful. He had a wonderful wife, and children who he didn't quite nurture and value. He liked to play golf, go to gym, have drinks with his friends on the weekend. But from the time of his diagnosis, his tone of voice changed, his lingo changed, the arrogance that he had inside of him disappeared, and the sense of superficiality that wrapped him also ended quickly. He stayed away from superficial relationships and friends and held on to his wife, his children, and 2 or 3 very close friends that he knew were genuine. It got to the point where on his last day, all that was on his mind was no regrets, live in the present, growth, relationships. Now, the power driving this change, this transformation, I call the power of mortality. My name, as you've heard, is Brad Kitay. When I was 14, I was a young high school boy on a very long school holiday. And we would go down to Video Easy with the friends and rent out 10 videos for $10. And we'd binge on Sylvester Stallone action movies all holiday long. And Braveheart. And in a moment of madness, during one of the movies, I got up from the couch. This is a true story. And out of nowhere, I walked to the phone book, found the number for the local old age home, which I had passed on my way to school, and called them up and said to them, "Hello, my name is Brad Kitay. I would like to volunteer." And the lady was very polite and she said to me, "Well, when would suit your parents to bring you for an interview?" To which I replied to her, "I have a bike and I'd like to come now." And the rest is history. Because there in the home, I built relationships with some of the elderly people that became some of my very best friends. My closest friend, Rita Kessel, was 93, a German Jewish Holocaust survivor. I said to my wife on our first date that the woman that I felt the most similar to me in life was Rita. Not necessarily the best thing you could say on a first date, but it didn't stop her. And it was a win-win situation because the elderly appreciated somebody giving them the time of day, someone that would listen to them. And for me, it was an opportunity to hear the wisdom of people that had lived very long and often profound lives. It also was a feeling of doing something constructive and helpful. What I didn't know at that time was just how important that period of time was going to be in driving my life forward. Being down the road from my school, I organized a plan with the principal that during lunchtime, I'd be able to go down to the old age home and visit the elderly, my mates. And so I would go down. And it just so happened by great coincidence that our lunchtime hours coincided. And instead of having to eat my dry peanut butter sandwich for lunch, I was blessed with a very nice 3-course hot meal with my elderly friends. And sometimes you have to question your own motivations. But there at the home, I saw and learnt things that a 14-year-old boy usually doesn't see and learn. For a start, I learnt that the elderly certainly don't lose their libido. And if you're going to walk into a room, make sure you knock very loud. I also learned, thanks to a particular gentleman, how to smoke a cigar. But far more importantly, I learned a part of life that I had fortunately never been exposed to. And that part of life was death. Because here in the home, I saw my elderly friends face to face with their own mortality. I saw my friends move into palliative care. I saw their families sitting around their beds, watching to see if their chest would move up as they would take another breath, often not sure whether it was just a delay between breaths or it was in fact the end. I saw spouses of over 70 years coming to the realization that they are now alone. This grief and loss was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I was having conversations with these people, my elderly friends, about their own mortality, about their regrets of life, their proudest moments, what they hoped for the future, what they wanted to be remembered for, and the legacy that they will leave behind. As a teenager, I would discuss with my dad my career path. That usually was what form of accounting I would practice. But he'd always say, find what you love to do and make a career out of it. And so, instead of taking the good Jewish boy path of being a doctor, lawyer, or accountant, I took the path of becoming a rabbi. Someone whose job it is to sit alongside people who are suffering, who are dying, families that are grieving, to be there with them and to comfort them in the most basic human way possible. But for me, clearly it's not a job, it's a life calling and something that wherever I've been in the world, I've always gravitated towards. But there's something about the time between terminal diagnosis and the end of life, this final period that goes beyond sad. And the only term that I can find to describe it is beautiful. It is full of the deep beauty of life. And of course it's sad and there are very, very many tears to be had, but it's also uplifting and it's frankly inspirational. Suddenly life is seen completely differently, not just by the person who's received the diagnosis, but by their friends and by their family. All of a sudden people can feel and see the richness of life. It's as if your windows have just been cleaned and all of a sudden you see things now that you couldn't see before. Relationships become stronger, priorities change. What was important yesterday, all of a sudden, is not. And of course, old age, terminal illness, and death of loved ones force us to consider our mortality. But it's not only then. About 2 weeks ago, I had the very special, sad, and to me sentimental experience visiting a couple, an elderly couple, who had just come to the realization that they couldn't live at home by themselves anymore and they needed to move into a care facility. They were struggling with the fact that they had 90 years worth of possessions in their home and they were moving into a small room with a single cupboard each and a bedside table, and that was it. What do you keep and what do you give away? And I helped them by making 5 piles: keep, throw, Facebook Marketplace, charity, and family. Give to the family. And that process was a very powerful and quite a harrowing experience for me, because like possibly others, I'm a professional hoarder. I don't like to throw away, and many of us don't like to throw things away just in case we will one day need them. When we go camping, if we go camping, we've never been camping, we're not thinking about going camping, but maybe one day we will want to go camping and we might need the tent. Never mind, we only stay in the Sheraton, but who knows? And I'd like to ask everybody here a question. You can answer by raise of hand. Who here holds on to possessions of their parents? Who holds on to possessions of their grandparents? Who holds on to possessions of their great-grandparents? Now, our great-grandparents lived 100 years ago. And after 100 years, all that's left of their possessions probably is a vase, an ashtray, a little pot, and only then they're held by 2 or 3 people in the room. When we consider what our possessions are and what we hold on to, and what we'd take with us in a 3x4 room, I'd like to suggest that what we'll be passing on to our children, who will have very many possessions of their own, will be the password to our iCloud account, in which they will see 17 million photos that we've left for them. And of those 17 million, they'll see 24,000 selfies taken by the mirror and wonder whether their grandparents ever did anything constructive in their lives. But back to facing mortality, it's not only at these extremes that we face and experience our mortality, it's also as we enter middle age. Now, middle age is a very broad term. For some people it's 35, for other people they're 70 and still haven't hit middle age. But we start to face it when we realize we're not as cool and as hip as the next generation. We realize it and we face it when we have to learn the lingo that the young people are using. We face it when we realize that we say "the" before Facebook. We start to face it when our jokes become dad jokes, when the aches and pains start to come, when we have to wake up in the middle of the night to relieve ourselves. Our mortality hits us. When we see children we remember crawling around, now having babies of their own, we realize that there is a circle of life. And to put it gently, we're not quite at the beginning of it. So what should our priorities be? And whilst we can want very many things, what are our real needs in and from life? I'll ask that again. What should our priorities be? And while our list of wants can go on forever, what are our real needs in and from life? And the spoiler alert is that I'm not going to answer the question, because I don't see myself as a guru who's going to give the answers to all of life's big questions and conundrums, although I'm told I might make a lot of money from doing so. I see myself more in helping to facilitate the question being asked, and perhaps, as I'll do now, give a framework in which to think of an answer we can all answer ourselves. Many of you would have heard of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. His hierarchy of needs describes the sources of motivation and the levels of needs that we as people have. going from the most basic to the most complex. The hierarchy begins with the physiological, the need to breathe, to eat, to drink, to go to the bathroom. And you know the feeling. If you're gasping for air or you're desperate for the toilet, on your mind is not how do I form relationships or how do I build my self-esteem. All you can think of is I need oxygen and I need a toilet. Nothing else can cross the mind. But once those physiological needs are cared for, we can move up to the next stage. And that is safety. Physical safety, emotional safety, financial safety. Things like having a secure job, some savings. On top of safety, we have interpersonal. The need for relationships, for belonging, for acceptance, for love. On top of that, we have the needs of esteem, to feel self-esteem, worth, the esteem of others. On top of esteem, we have the need for cognitions, the need for comprehension, curiosity, for attaining knowledge. Above cognitions, we have the aesthetic level, the need for beauty, for music, for art, for theatre, for the beautification of ourselves, our clothing, our homes. But Maslow said that the hierarchy of needs, that the pinnacle of all needs, is the need for self-actualization. As he describes it, what a man can be, he must be. Essentially, reach your potential. This is the greatest goal of man, says Maslow. But there is an inbuilt bug in this idea of self-actualization, because actualization is just a factor of potential. It is the realization of your potential. But potential is infinite. You can always do more. You can always be more than you are now. If you've managed to build an asset base of $20 million, have you actualized yourself? Have you reached your potential? No, because you could have made 30 million. And if you've got 2 million followers on Instagram, have you actualized then? Well, you could always have 2,000,001 or 3 million. There is always more to be had. The Talmud puts it in this way. One who has 100 wants 200. And when he has 200, he wants 400. Not only are we not satisfied with what we have, but by virtue of having it, we want more. And the Talmud continues and says that you'll never meet a person who passes away and even half of what they wanted was achieved. So Maslow's answer to the need of life, the need in and from life, self-actualization, in a way is impossible. It's unachievable. But people live within that paradox of life anyway. They actualize, they achieve, they accrue wealth, stature, luxury. But then they always wonder why they don't feel that satisfaction, that existential fulfillment, and all that they feel inside is what Viktor Frankl termed the existential vacuum, a sense of emptiness inside. And this, I have found, is the exact point of the midlife crisis, or has been termed as well now, the quarter-life crisis, where people come to the realization that everything they have been working towards has not brought them the fulfillment that they were after. That the good job, the house, the car, the overseas holiday, the luxuries of life, nothing has filled that vacuum. And I've had the good fortune of sitting with some of Australia's most actualized individuals. And what I found, without one exception, is that on the inside, things don't appear the same way as they do on the outside. And there is a huge lack of emptiness and direction. Astonishingly, Maslow, as he grew older, as he faced his own mortality towards the end of his life, he began to reconsider his theory, his hierarchy of needs. He realized that self-actualization couldn't be the pinnacle need of humans in the world because the outcomes weren't there when they should have been. He also realized that people that actualized the most, he found, would present with very undesirable traits. And usually that would impact negatively on their relationships. Maslow's slight addition to his hierarchy of needs wasn't just a small amendment, it was a revolution. It changed everything. So if actualization wasn't the pinnacle of human needs, what is then? Maslow called it self-transcendence. And that became, on top of self-actualization, the pinnacle need of humans in life. If self-actualization is about becoming what you can be, self-transcendence is about going beyond yourself. And there are three forms of self-transcendence. The first is ego transcendence. The second is transcendence in relation to other people. And the third is transcendence in a spiritual form. Ego transcendence, perhaps, is the hardest of them all. It's where we overcome the challenges and the bottlenecks that hold us back in life. It's having to overcome anger, impatience, negativity, self-indulgence, jealousy. The ability to overcome these bottlenecks in our life and to become more. It's the ability to overcome negative emotions, go beyond the place where we're at right now and see ourselves in a bigger picture. Perhaps the greatest form of ego transcendence is that of asking forgiveness. I'd like to share with you a story of a friend named Jonathan. And I call him a friend because the people that I sit with in these difficult times of their lives become friends. Jonathan was a self-diagnosed womanizer. He owned a lot of commercial property. He was a big socialite in the town. At the age of 60, he was struck with a stroke which left half of his body paralyzed. But it also did something else. It removed his filter. I had never ever heard somebody so honest, ever. And often that honesty was highly inappropriate for the situation and for the people. But one thing's for sure, he wore his heart on his sleeve and he said only what he felt. And what I saw in that heart that was on his sleeve was a very sensitive, kind, and gentle, beautiful heart. During his final weeks, he began to see his life differently. He accounted for his past misdoings. He actively apologized to the people that he hurt, and his outlook and his goals changed. At the time of his funeral, his family spoke humorously of many of his misdoings. When I spoke not of the man he had been, but I spoke of the man who, the transcendence of his own ego, he came to be. Second, self-transcendence through relationships is achieved by recognizing that going beyond oneself is actually a strength, not a weakness. That when you invite somebody else into your bubble, when you care about somebody else, when you give of yourself to somebody else, you don't become half, you become two. And as your bubble of relationships grow, you yourself increase in value. Because relationships mean going out of yourself. It means thinking about other people's best interests, considering how they feel, listening to them even when it's hard to. It's a great paradox that when we are sad or feeling down, we tend to focus inwards on ourselves. But in fact, the more we focus inwards, the more down we find ourselves. And actually, the best way to raise ourselves up is not to look inwards, it's actually to look outwards. And just yesterday, literally yesterday, I sat with a family who was grieving the loss of their mother and their wife. And they were asking me about my family and about my plans. And after a little while, I said to them, enough about me. Would you like to talk about your family and about your mother and your wife, who happened to be a very special person? And they said to me something very profound. They said, when you're thinking about the well-being of other people, you forget your own sorrows. That is transcendence of the self in relation to others. And finally, spiritual transcendence. That is going beyond space and time, connecting with the beyond, which may be God, or may be a spiritual reality, may be some cosmic purpose that a person has. And this spiritual transcendence actually was one of the reasons why Maslow was so sheepish to publish his amendment to his hierarchy of needs. Psychology is a science. And he knew that people wouldn't be able to appreciate the place of spirituality inside of that science. But spending my last 2 decades with people facing their mortality, I've seen two very clear but inverse movements. On the one hand, mortality forces a very stark reality check on its subscribers. And let's be clear, there is no unsubscribe button. Slowly, physical health declines, cognitive health declines. Our professional networks slowly decay. Our professional career slowly disintegrates. Slowly, with time, as we age, all of this leaves us. Even the financial security that we left aside to go and enjoy the last years of our lives and travel the world on the 7 seas. Not once have I seen couples who have planned for it, but old age, illness, or death of their spouse hasn't allowed for it. When a child comes into the world, their fists are clenched. They want to achieve, they want to hold on, they want to accomplish. But when a person passes away, that clenched fist becomes an open palm. And we let go. And that process of letting go is a process. Usually it doesn't happen suddenly. It's like 2 connecting flights, where the first flight they say, take as much baggage as you like, 10 pieces of 30 kilos. And they're only to come to the next flight where they say, sorry, no baggage allowed. On the other hand, as we face our mortality, we transcend, often through no choice of our own. We let go of the transient and we hold on to what is real. We become more modest people, more humble people. We overcome anger. We become absurdly optimistic of life. We leave negativity. We forgive. We focus on the relationships that we have and we invest in them. We start to think not, how can I help myself and what can I do for myself, but what can I do for others? We become people that we are proud to be. Proud not of what we have or the achievements that we have or the letters before or after our name. We become proud of the people that we have become. But what if we can take this transformative experience, usually the end of life or this experience of mortality, and extend it earlier into our lives? Rather than lasting 1 week or 6 months, why can't we bring it into where we are right now? Why wait until we're fighting illness, mortality, the death of a loved one, to start living this way and seeing life in this way? I'd like to share a brief story of a 42-year-old businessman who works not far from here, who had reached really the pinnacle of his business career. Now, unlike some of the others I've mentioned, he has always been a very modest, a very kind soul. And he approached me with a feeling, with a sense that to continue doing what he's doing will just be more of the same. Once you've actualized, once you've made a certain amount, it's all just sort of gets lost in itself. And he knew intuitively he had to do something different. And as such a good person and having such a good eye for business and strategy, I suggested to him, why doesn't he take his skills and abilities and instead of succeeding more, help others succeed? Help young budding businessmen and business professionals succeed in their own right. And he took the advice. About 2 years later, he spends a quarter of his time on his own affairs, and he spends 3/4 of his time helping others. And not long ago, he said to me that the pleasure, the fulfillment that he gets from helping one young person succeed or take on a new contract, he said it brings him more joy than him attaining 10 new contracts himself. Obsession with actualization is arrogance because it's only about me. But transcendence is humility because it's not about me at all. It's about how can I contribute to others to go beyond myself. We can live life not only as self-actualization, but also as self-transcendence, where we forget about our own pleasure and worry about giving pleasure to others. We forget about our own success and worry about others being successful. We forget about controlling other people and start to control ourselves. We forget about pushing other people down in order to feel good and start empowering people. We want to see people thrive because of us. And finally, back to David. When I first met him soon after his diagnosis, the person I met was right with fear and anxiety. What he faced was an imminent loss of everything that he had worked for. Almost everything he had accomplished, he was losing. But by the time he left us, he left with ultimate peace, clarity, and tranquility. He had transcended his physical incapability, transcended his bad habits, reconnected with his wife and his children. He'd become a new person. And after he gave me his list, no regrets, live in the present, growth, and relationships, he added one last thing, something which has inspired this talk, and which everything until now has been an introduction to this word. And that word, as we've spoken about, was the word transcendence. And that was the last word I ever heard from him. It's a word that never came up in our conversations. It's a word I'd never considered. But it was a word said from a person who saw life clearly and in perspective. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Brad. It's my pleasure to call on Professor Brett Davies to do a vote of thanks for Brad.